Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. If you thought the budget cap saga from the end of last season was dramatic, get ready to do it all over again. Rumours are circulating that for the 2022 season now, almost half the grid might have breached the cost cap, especially with all the inflationary pressures of last year. Stefano Domenicali from Formula 1 says he's very concerned about this possibility, and even Red Bull say they can't guarantee they are compliant. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I'd greatly appreciate it. Just one final thing on the Sainz penalty that was upheld following an FIA meeting yesterday. Sainz says, look, very disappointed that the FIA did not grant us a right to review. 2 weeks later, I still think the penalty is too disproportionate, and I believe it should have been at least reviewed based on the evidence and reasoning we presented. The evidence and reasoning they presented was basically the tyres were cold and the sun was in his eyes, and the FIA were like, that didn't cut it, to be honest. We have to continue working together to improve certain things for the future. The consistency and decision-making process has been a hot topic for many seasons now, and we need to be clearer for the sake of our sport. Which, look, I agree with them on this one, and let's be honest here, right? The fact that Gasly and Sargent got no penalties for what they did at the end of the race, but Sainz did, is definitely on the inconsistent side. I know Karun mentioned the idea here of whether, if a race finishes under the safety car, is a 5-second penalty too harsh, because Sainz went from being, what, 4th all the way down to 12th based on a 5-second penalty because the race finished on the safety car. Maybe that shouldn't be the case. He reckons maybe a 3-place grid drop on the next race if the race finishes under a safety car. From a proportionate perspective, maybe this is sensible, but at the same time, look, he got a 5-second penalty. If we want the consistency, then it's consistent, right? You get a 5-second penalty, you serve it if you haven't served it in a pit stop when the race ends. That's consistent, but, you know, we can't really talk too much about the consistency factor with the FIA because it very rarely is, to be honest. One of the other hot topics right now in F1, and for good reason, is the future of the Canada. This season we were meant to have 24 races. Next season there might be 25. Of course, this season only 23 now with no China. But still, it's going to expand further. There's a lot of competition for the slots on the Canada. They probably can't go above 25, although they might try. And the issue is there's many privately funded circuits, such as Zandvoort and Silverstone. Great tracks, Silverstone especially. I mean, Silverstone, home of Formula 1 racing in the UK, obviously. The first Grand Prix was held there in 1950. Legendary track. We've heard talks about Spa, about Monza, about Imola potentially being on their way out as well, with a lot of competition from potentially US Grand Prix tracks. They might want to add another one there. We've got South Korea wanting to get involved. We've got maybe more races in the Middle East. The Saudis, I think, want 2 Grand Prix. So, I mean, it's an absolute mess. Now, the issue is for Silverstone and Zandvoort is that they're privately funded circuits. That means if Formula 1, so it's not really the FIA here, it's Formula 1 Management, FOM, if they say, hey, we want more money, because, like, they want more money, right? That's how business works. But also, if there is more competition for spots, because everyone wants a Grand Prix right now, then, you know, the price is going to go up. That's how supply and demand works. And if these tracks can't meet the demands, then they might be gone. Now, this would be obviously a travesty, and I don't expect this to be the case, but there has been pressure, and even we heard talks from Stefano Domenicali the other day saying that, well, if you guys can't commit now, like, doesn't matter what your history has been for the last 100 years, we don't care type thing, which was a concerning statement for sure. And especially when you look at Verstappen's home track in Zandvoort, Hamilton's home track in Silverstone, and when Hamilton retires, it'll be Russell and Norris's and, you know, the next generation of British Formula 1, their home Grand Prix, they might be gone. So I don't really buy that it's going to be going yet. But, you know, these are the pressures that these tracks are under because, like, a 4th US Grand Prix is apparently in conversation. South Korea is interested. Kyle Army wants back in from South Africa. They want to expand outside of Europe, and that means that tracks such as France, we were at last season, Paul Ricard, that's gone off the calendar. What the future is for Spa, Silverstone, Zandvoort and others is a massive question, but it's a key concern to Formula 1 fans everywhere that actually like good racing on good tracks and historic tracks that. I mean, they can't look at the Silverstone Grand Prix last year and say that it's got to go, but I mean, you can't really write this stuff nowadays, unfortunately. The other big potential drama brewing is the budget cap again. Last season, it was a massive talking point at the end of last year, kind of Singapore, Japan time, where the budget cap came up from 2021. There were rumours that Red Bull had breached the cap by, turned out it was about $2 million, and Hamilton said, look, 250, 300k, that was a new front wing, that might have made the difference in the 2021 season, and there was lots of drama on this over a period of weeks. The issue is, though, that was the 2021 season cap, and by the time all the accounting and the auditing had been done, it was almost the end of 2022. So by the time these teams figured out exactly what it meant for the cap, and especially Red Bull figured out what the cost cap meant and how exactly it was being determined by the accountants on the Formula 1 side, it was almost the end of the 2022 season, to which point any ideas they had or any kind of spinning they had over that season was almost at the end of its cycle anyway. So this is the question about whether the budget cap is going to be breached yet again by potentially many teams, and it might even be more likely this year than it was last year. So first of all, there's been all the talk about the budget cap itself, whether it's a farce, as Eddie Jordan says, just because of how well Red Bull have done anyway. Has it really made any difference? Ferrari don't seem to think so. Maybe it will bite them down the line, but for now it doesn't really seem like them breaching the cap really made too much difference. And maybe there's even an incentive for some teams to be like, hey, maybe we should just go a little bit over, maybe it's going to be beneficial. And maybe even Red Bull thought last season, I think there's a chance that Red Bull thought in 2021 that many teams were going to go over, and therefore, you know, a small fine or whatever wouldn't really matter. Turns out they were the only team, and therefore there was all this drama, the cheating stuff, the comments from Zach Brown and others. Now, in December last year, after all this had been settled, Christian Horner said there might well be 6 teams in breach of the cap, and Helmut Marko said the current status is that 6 teams are over it. Now, this is based on the 2022 season, and this is the thing with these accounting processes. They take so long that by the time we're talking about the 2022 budget cap, it's almost at the end of the 2023 season, but it is what it is. So Horner reckons several teams might well be in breach, and this is a few months ago now, but it's been a topic that's been raised up again, largely because of the energy prices and all the inflation that happened last year. 2021, they breached the cap, Red Bull. Most other teams were on it. Aston Martin had a procedural breach and they got a small fine, but it was generally okay. But last year, from the start of the season, there was a big push for many of the teams to push the budget cap up to try and match the inflationary figures they were seeing. Transport costs, all this stuff was going up. A fair point. In the end, Formula 1 said, all right, we'll up it by maybe a fraction, but we don't want to kind of go back on what it means to be a budget cap, and the teams have got to comply. The lower funded teams didn't want it to go up at all, right? And you can understand why that was the case. So at the end of the season, Red Bull obviously figured out in about August, September time that, oh no, we messed it up in 2021, and by that time, a lot of the 2022 season had already transpired. There may have been some serious and quick questions asked, and then you've got, after the season ends, you've got Helmut Marko and Red Bull saying from Christian Horner's side that there's going to be 6 teams over it. Now, you know, you wouldn't think they would be saying that unless they thought themselves that there was a chance they went over it again, especially because of the energy cost rise. And this is where it comes back to the present day, with Stefano Domenicali saying today that he is more than nervous about the possibility of another set of budget cap breaches for their submissions. I'm pretty sure that everyone now understands what the effect is if there's a breach, what the punishment is that Red Bull got, the 10% reduction in the wind tunnel testing time, the $7 million fine, which is pretty much irrelevant. But he says the focus on this will be very big. We are discussing this on the FIA side to make sure that the control and certification will be done much earlier, because the effect, if some teams will be over it, has to be done in a proper way in as short a time as possible to be more credible. So I think this is good in general. They're going to try and speed this whole process up and try and get to the numbers earlier in the season, because last year it was like July, August, September where we actually started to get some rumors about this. It might be marginally earlier this year, maybe a month earlier, who knows. But it's very interesting that the Formula 1 CEO says he is very nervous, more than nervous, about people breaching it again, because, I mean, last year there was so much discussion about it, and if teams are over again, what does that mean, right? Because it's said in the rules, I believe, over what happened if there was a budget gap breach, that it depends on kind of, you know, history in a way. If it's your first breach, it will be considered in probably a lighter way, as maybe Red Bull's was last year, than it would be with another one. Like if Red Bull breach again, let's say, 2 years in a row, like, I mean, it's not looking good, right? And surely the punishment for that has to be greater than the first year's punishment was. That will certainly be the argument if that is the case. And Red Bull don't seem convinced that they have made it, because even this was in February this year, Christian Horner said, we can't be 100% sure we complied. They think that they have, and of course they thought that they had in 2021, but that didn't go so well by the time the actual FIA accountants got on top of it. So it's a very interesting conversation that Red Bull thought in December that half the teams are going to be over the cap because of the energy cost rises. And if that is the case, all sorts of questions are going to be raised, and maybe Stefano Domenicali is understandably nervous, because if that does happen and maybe Aston Martin or maybe Red Bull are in the red again, then, I mean, yeah, it's not looking good for the sport already, and yeah, might not if that happens again. Just a couple of things to mention here before we close out the video. There's been some discussion from Alpine that they can catch Mercedes. Not quite sure I buy this one, to be honest, but Otmar says, we think we can fight with them. Last year, our development rate was pretty good. If we can keep the same this year, I think we should get closer. Now, maybe in the immediate term, this might be possible. Alpine have a big development they're bringing for Baku. They have a big development they're bringing in Imola, but it's going to be an evolution of their current car design. They reckon they can gain 6/10 by the middle of the season, which is a good margin, and if they can do that, they will be on Mercedes gearbox, or maybe even slightly ahead, who knows. But obviously, Mercedes aren't just going to sit there either, and in terms of mid-season development, comparing the Mercedes to the Alpine, kind of a no contest the majority of the time. So not really sure what they're getting at here, Alpine, but they're going to keep trying. They looked quite good in Australia, but I think part of that was because Gasly was getting carried around in 4 DRS zones by Carlos Sainz, so I think it did make them look slightly better than they actually were. But another good example here of the Alpine confidence that never actually translates into any meaningful results. And just the final thing, speaking of Hamilton and the Bridgestone tyres they used to enjoy back in the day, there were some rumours lately that Pirelli might be not on their way out of making the tyres for Formula 1, but in a tyre war, let's say. I know that the guys, Matt and Tommy, did a video about this as well, the pros and the cons of it. Back in the day, we used to have Michelin versus Bridgestone, and it was pretty interesting, like good and bad, I think, in some ways. Michelin, though, say, because Bridgestone is interested in coming back in to make tyres for the sport, Michelin say no, they're not doing that because they don't want to make tyres that destroy themselves, as they describe it. We know that the Formula 1 tyres have been mandated or have been requested really by Formula 1 to degrade substantially so that more pit stops have to happen. Back in the day, they could go an entire race on one set of tyres. Formula 1 now says, like, Pirelli, make tyres that degrade fast so that it makes the racing more interesting, more pit stops and stuff, which is true, but it also has the side effect, if the tyres degrade fast, of drivers not pushing them as hard. It's all about tyre management in the first 20 laps of the race. So, I don't know, maybe there's a compromise to be had on this, but Michelin says, yeah, like, we're not going to be coming back unless we can maybe keep our tyres for the entire race, which should be probably not something that anyone really wants to see, especially with no refueling as we used to have back in the day as well. So, interesting questions. Intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.